So here we are at chapter 13. And chapter 13 works with the reflexive pronouns, the reflexive adjective, and the intensive pronoun. And we'll handle these one at a time. The reflexive pronoun. You may not have thought about this actually at all, because in some ways it'll make sense. The reflexive pronoun is called so because it reflects the subject. I see myself in the mirror versus I see you. Caesar praised himself versus Caesar praised him. Sometimes we run into confusion about this, and we'll talk about that in a second, but the confusion's in English, not in Latin. Let's get down to the basics in that in the book you will see them listed as the reflexive pronoun me is me, me, he, me, he, me, 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 me. Now, two things to note. Number one, you're thinking, this is just the pronoun we already know about me, and you would be correct. Number two, why is there no nominative? Because the reflexive pronoun by its nature reflects the subject. And as such, there is no nominative because the nominative is going to be the subject. So, that's the one for me. What about the one for you? Again, no nominative. Tui, tibi, te, te. Great. Again, same argument. Okay, Mr. Bessie, this is one we already know, tui. I even misspelled that. 4 words and I misspelled one. The nos word, nostri, nobis, nos, nobis. We saw ourselves, we bought ourselves pizza, we came by ourselves. That is, again, the pronoun is reflecting the subject. And so far there's very little issue because we're just repackaging, let's face it, the words you already know. And then we have westri, wobis, wos, wobis. Great. That makes sense. We now have a new one. Sibi, sui, sibi, say, say. Let me start this again. Sui, sibi, say, say. And this is singular and plural. And this just means, for lack of a better term, one's self. Caesar sees him. Caesar sees himself. How's that? And it goes on and on and on. The book has many examples. I wrote myself a letter. Ego, scripsi, literas, I wrote a letter to me. So I wrote myself a letter. Because we would not say in English, well, we could say I wrote a letter to myself. Cicero, scripsit, literas, mihi. And I don't think this is problematic, frankly. And then when you get to the reflexive, the example it gives in the book, just like I wrote before, Cicero, or similar to the one I just wrote, Cicero praised him versus, meaning some other guy, okay? Cicero praised himself. And so I think it's handy to have just a separate word. You just know it's self. Cicero praised him, Cicero praised himself. So, this was number one. This was the reflexive pronouns. And again, I don't think it's terribly problematic. If I'm misreading the room, by all means, let me know if you have questions. The reflexive adjective is a little more tricky, but frankly, it's a little bit nicer. The adjective for himself, because here we're talking about just pronouns. He saw himself. What about saw his book? Cicero saw his book. In English, we don't know if that's his own book. We have to do this, and we don't often do it. We regularly omit it. Cicero saw his own book at the bookstore. We just don't say that. We say Cicero saw his book. So you may not realize that you've been tripped up by this, and that's okay. At the very least, let's look how Latin handles it. The reflexive pronoun, reflexive adjective is suus, sua, suum. And what that means is one's own. Okay? So, suum librum, his own book. His own, what else, what examples do they have in the book? His own friend. Suum amicum, for example. So, Caesar sees his book. In this case, it's his own book. Caesar sees his friend, his own friend. What if Caesar wasn't talking about his book? Then you would say Caesar sees his book, meaning somebody else's book. Caesar sees his friend, meaning someone else's friend. You would use the personal pronoun is, ea, id to mean someone else's. I would argue that there are times when we would translate these sentences exactly the same. Caesar suum librum vidit, Caesar eius librum vidit. I would argue that there are times in which we would both translate these both as Caesar sees his book. And we don't know in English if he means his own book or someone else's book. This pronoun in Latin actually makes it easier. Caesar sees his own book versus Caesar sees his book. And for the purposes of this class, if you want to think of suum always as his own, that may be helpful, and I would not discourage that. So, this is the only issue with number 2, the second thing, the reflexive adjective. Latin has a way to say his own as opposed to his by using the reflexive adjective suus a versus the pronoun his or hers. This works for hers or its, however you want to do it. It works all across the board. Singular, plural, doesn't matter. That's number 2. Let's go to number 3, the intensive pronoun. The intensive pronoun is ipse, ipsa, ipsum. Let me decline it here for you. In the singular, ipse, ipsa, ipsum, ipsius, no surprise there, ipsius, no surprise, ipsius, ipsi, ipsi, just fun to say, ipsi, ipsum, ipsam, ipsum, and then ipso, ipsa, ipso. Then in the plural, ipsi, ipsi, ipsa, ipsorum, ipsarum, ipsorum, ipsis, 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 ipsos, ipsas, ipsa, then ipsis, ipsis, ipsis. This is singular, this is plural. And here you will note we have the consistent, I won't say errors, because by now you see it's very, very regular. And they're not inconsistencies, they're not errors. The eus, eus, eus in the genitive and the e in the plural, in the dative, it's just like the unus nauta adjectives. It's just like hic, hi, coke. It's just like lay, ala, allude. It's like many other ones you've already known, so no surprise. You may not like it, you may groan a bit, but you are not, I guarantee, surprised. What does this mean? This means self. Caesar Caesar spoke to me. Okay, that's one thing. Caesar himself. Caesar ipse spoke to me. There are times we want to say that. Oh, no, I got a letter from Caesar himself. That would be a use in the ablative. Okay, so there are times when we use the intensive just to show, hey, it does exactly what it says. It intensifies the meaning. No, I didn't get a letter just from the office. Dear Mr. Bessie, thank you so much for writing us, blah, blah, blah. No, Caesar himself sent me a letter. And I think that makes perfect sense in English. The problem is, what do you do in the other cases? And I'll cut to the chase. I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know the answer. Because it says, I see Caesar himself. That gets a little awkward in English. No, I saw Caesar. We don't use the intensive in the other cases, whereas Latin does. I saw Caesar himself. I saw Caesar the man. I believe, from this chapter is going to be the most awkward part of the chapter, because the Romans will use an intensive not when it's just the subject like we do. Okay? We do all the time. Regularly. It's not a foreign, in other words, it's not a foreign use to us. Caesar himself, no, we do that. It's when you use these other cases. I saw Caesar himself. I got a letter from Caesar himself. That does make sense. I think it's just in the accusative, the direct object. How do you translate that in English? Don't feel compelled, I would argue, unless you can think of something else, in the accusative case, it's going to be very hard to translate into English. And I saw Caesar himself, perfectly fine translation. I don't know how often we would in real life talk like that, but I would argue, for the purpose of this chapter, go with it. That way you understand that this is an intensive pronoun used with the used with Latin. So that's okay. You can look at the examples. Cicero himself praised me. Cicero praised me myself. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm just taking this one straight from the book. Cicero praised me myself. Yeah, I don't know how we would say that in good English, and even the book has to go around that. I myself praised his friend. Yeah, no, I myself praised him. I thought it was a good thing he did. Everybody else was giving him heck for it, but I myself praised him. That's the next step. But again, Cicero sent Caesar's letter itself. Cicero sent the Caesaris of Caesar the letter ipsos. Cicero sent the very letter, the letter itself of Caesar. The book says actual, and I think this is sometimes how we translate the intensive, isn't it? Cicero sent Caesar's actual letter. The Romans would use that with ipsos, the letter itself. So, for the purposes of this chapter, I am quite happy using the self, the letter itself. And let's worry about what that means. Let's understand the grammar of the letter as you get of the word, of the reflexive pronoun. As you get more used to it, yeah, think about how in English, these are things I still don't understand how we do it in English, to be honest with you. But I do like the word actual. Cicero sent Caesar's actual letter. That may be sometimes And I don't want to go there quite yet. Again, until you get this under your belt, Cicero sent Caesar's letter itself. Go with that, okay? Let's understand the grammar before we start not understanding the grammar and jumping somewhere else, okay? So, but I do think this actual is how we don't mean actual, we mean that's our intensive. That's the English intensive. Okay, now you've got me thinking, so I'm going to leave you with that thought, okay? But these are the three things we focused on: the reflexive pronouns, which I don't believe are problematic, but please let me know if I'm wrong. The reflexive adjectives, which you might not have thought about, but okay, something new, it makes sense. And then this intensive pronoun, which isn't problematic in the nominative case, and sometimes in some of the other cases, but every once in a while it gets a little quirky. Let me know if you have questions. Have a great day.